Hi everybody, and welcome again to Unfiltered Business. If you're new to the channel, my name is Josh. This is Unfiltered Business. Today, I'm diving deep into the Malaysian media landscape. And I'm so glad that I had the chance to speak to my next guest, who is a veteran broadcaster from BFM. His name is Sharaad Kuttan, and we had the opportunity to talk about so many things, including certain beliefs and notions that I had about the Malaysian media or the journalism landscape in Malaysia. When we talk about the Malaysian press freedom, or at least when I think about the Malaysian press freedom, the day zero for me is the 2018 general election. So there was a period of before 2018, and then there was a period of after 2018. But maybe that's not really the case, because the way I think is that before 2018 you had a lot of controls and restraints, and there was so much a media could do and couldn't do. And we look at incidences or situations like Ops Lalang or the NFC scandal or any of the other scandals, we see that there was some form of control, there was some form of truth that was allowed to be reported. But maybe that's not entirely the case. Because as Sharaad and I discussed this topic, the history is far more nuanced. So when we look at history, did the media play a significant role in the development of Malaysia as well? So we are looking at Malaysia gaining its independence in 1957 and having to now start to develop the country. So was Malaysian media seen as a tool to help in that development? We often talk about the media being the fourth estate, a pillar of democracy to keep the government in check. Is that just a romantic abstraction? So in my discussion with Sharaad Kuttan, we unpack the reality of political pressures across different administrations, and more importantly, the corporate constraints. We always think of media being pressured by just politicians. But are there other players involved? So I'll be discussing this and so much more with Sharaad Kuttan. So let's get straight into the conversation. I always see Malaysian news media divided into three different timelines or three different segments. You have the two actually. So anything before 2018 and then anything after 2018. So before 2018, you see things like Ops Lalang, you see things like the 1MDB expose. And then after 2018, post the general election, the restrictions on the media seems to have been slightly lifted, or maybe lifted, I don't know. But I want to know what you think about it. Is there these two timelines? And then do you think, coming from the media house yourself, that these restrictions were lifted after that after the general election in 2018?
It might be that the way that you frame the Malaysian media's evolution is a function of your generation and your kind of for what for you were important sort of moments in Malaysian political history, right? So, but I imagine with Ops Lalang, you were very young. I'm just guessing.
Yes.
Right. 1MDB may be something more recent. I mean, I think for somebody who lived through the Barisan Nasional period when they dominated politics, and there was both the state media as well as private media, and private media was linked to political interests, you might get the impression, if you didn't live through that time, that it was all fairly, one-dimensional, that it was all government propaganda, and there was nothing beyond that. But if you lived through that time, you would have known of nuances, or you would have felt there were nuances in that picture, right? You would have thought of the Star as being a place where, while we now see it as kind of a mainstream pro-government type of newspaper, that in fact it housed a lot of alternative voices, for instance. And then beyond the mainstream media, there were obviously things like party political organs, and I'm thinking of Harakah in particular, because not just of its popularity, but after the Reformasi movement or the outbreak of that particular political crisis, they included a English pullout. Harakah. And that was run by Latifah Koya, the former MACC chief's father. right? So Haji Koyukuti ran that, and it was actually very decent. It had really sophisticated analysis of a range of issues. And so suddenly, I remember that time, you would be able to, purchase this off the street, right? You go to a news vendor and you'd be able to read fairly decent journalism in the Haraka at that time. And so, I think the picture for me is much more nuanced with regard to this long history of the Malaysian media.
So, do you remember where you were or what you were doing, or where you were even working at that point of time when the Ops Lalang took place?
So Ops Lalang, I was at university. This is 1987. I had, because I was in Singapore at university, Ops Lalang was at sort of a distance to me. And so this is another, as it were, news outlet, which is Aliran Monthly. And Aliran Monthly, I used to read at the NUS, at the National University of Singapore Library. So I got a copy of it, and I remember, writing letters to Aliran and stuff. Yeah. And it was a source of alternative views, not news, but views on what was happening in Malaysia. And if you remember, Aliran as a civil society organization was very active in going to the ground, leading churamas and, organizing these kinds of things. So it wasn't like Malaysia was very, that the public space wasn't contested. In fact, Ops Lalang was a symptom of the fact that we had a vibrant civil society, that people were organizing around different issues. There were issue-based NGOs. There were also coalitions of NGOs that came together on various issues of public concern. And so, it was a very vibrant place. And so when they took civil society down in the Ops Lalang moment, it was because the political system could not deal with this vibrant landscape that included political contestation. So NGOs are not just, as it were, progressive, nice people. NGOs was a whole range of people with different passions and different points of view that were contesting what was happening in Malaysia at that time.
So I don't know whether is it because we come from two different societies, as in the society that I was in and you were in, because I felt like growing up, the news media were the official news houses. The one that you had, the Star, the New Straits Times, Berita Harian, and all of that, right? And anything that is reported from another publishing house is not seen as legit. They were like the tabloids in the US. So like what you said, the Haraka, I don't know if you remember the DAP, the Rocket, they had or at least that's how it was painted from where we had come from. And we thought this was the way news was going to be like. And then you come to 2015 when I shared about the 1MDB expose, and which was done, I think, by The Edge or something. Oh, sorry, it was done by first Sarawak Report, Claire Rucastle Brown, and then by The Edge. And you see The Edge license was suspended and the site to Sarawak Report was blocked, right? So for me, this was the normal way of how media worked. Only later on I realized, no, media is supposed to play a little bit more of a vibrant role. And the fourth pillar,
the fourth estate, yeah.
And for those that don't understand, the first 2-3 pillars are supposed to be the state, the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive. And then comes the media, which is, I suppose, is unspoken because it was never there officially, correct?
So that's a theory, right? So that's the theory of liberal democracies and how they ought to operate.
Yes.
But I would suggest that you put a kind of historical lens on questions of media, because the media as a fourth estate is a notion.
Yep.
The media is not one thing. It is often, especially in democracies in Europe and North America, actually quite divided, and they're owned by different people with different points of view, with different party affiliations often, and speak to different segments in society. So it's the fourth estate function is actually very it's an abstraction, right? But what you have in that mix, in the in the push and pull, the fact that you have left-wingers and right-wingers and centrists and liberal Democrats and maybe people who are, religious conservatives, all of them make up what we would say is a check on political institutions, as you mentioned, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, right? Those are institutions of state. These are non-state actors who yet nevertheless feed into a liberal democratic setup, right? Because it's about mobilizing opinion. It's about, getting people to vote in certain ways when elections come around. And so I think in Malaysia, the trajectory is very different. If you look at the colonial period and what newspapers did and how they became representative of both the colonial government, and for instance, in Singapore, it would be something like the Straits Times was, the sort of reflected pro-colonial values, where something like the Singapore Standard, which I believe was owned by some Burmese commercial interests, but I could be wrong about that. That gave a space for different voices, anti-colonial voices. So the colonial period was actually also full of the contestation of the Malay newspapers and all that, right? But once you get past independence and you had the consolidation of power by, sort of as with the natives, they, in some sense, pushed the media towards this idea that they had to play a supportive role in the development of of the country. And so you have something called developmental journalism.
Right.
That is a notion, an ideal propagated by the state in terms of constraining the media. So the media was not to just act on its own, in its own interest or the interest of its owners, but every media organization somehow had to conform or align itself with state agenda. Right. So that was the prevailing theory that happened post-independence until things started to loosen.
Before we carry on with this very critical conversation, I want to give a very special shout out to the sponsor for this episode, Chester's. Whether you're looking to upgrade your workspace or elevating your living room, Chester's brings world-class luxury furniture right here into Malaysia. Now, you would have seen other premium furnitures around, but I had the opportunity of visiting Chester's myself and seeing what they do differently from the rest of them. Why don't you come with me as I go and visit Chester's collection at Bangsar? I've seen the luxury furniture outlet Chester's collection along Jalan Maruf, but only after I walked into the store, I had realized that Chester's collection doesn't just design luxury furnitures. Their entire line of furnitures is engineered not just for a comfortable or luxurious feel, but for spine protection, for proper neck alignment, and circulation for your legs. So, how can Chester's help with your posture? A seat where you can adjust the seat depth actually protects circulation and reduces pressure. Adjustable armrest that is able to go up and down maintains spinal and upper body health. And good lumbar support maintains the natural and healthy curve of your lower spine. Healthy work, healthy productivity, healthy furnitures. At Chester's Collection, they've got your back.
So that means it is to make sure that the media is aligned with the government of the day for development purposes. Was this done in any other country? Any other country that was just...
I lived in Singapore and Malaysia. My life has been unfortunately straddling these two spaces, both authoritarian. In some ways, I think Indonesia, to some extent, the media also after Suharto came to power, was constrained to operate in a way that was, well, depending on how you look at it, a kind of a constructive voice for government, right? So you could be critical. I mean, it's not that there wasn't criticism, but criticism was often couched in sort of either elliptical, meaning people didn't directly hit the government, they kind of suggest something, or you do it. You know what constructive criticism is, right? You kind of be like, I like you, but let me tell you a little bit to help you move along in the right direction, kind of.
But that is not something that I guess I saw happen in other countries when it comes to news media. But just going back to my question earlier, right? This is typically what I saw as news media, that this was how it was reported, this is how the ownership is, and I did not know anything else better until I realized, no, wait, the media's role is a little bit more than just repeating what a politician said, which is what we always saw in the last, not, 20, 30 years ago. It was just a repeat of an event. It was a repeat of what someone said. As opposed to, which later on I found out, that media or news media plays a more important role. They're supposed to inform, they're supposed to educate, they're supposed to be the gatekeeper, be accountable, which maybe I didn't see much of it growing up. It was merely this happened, this is for your knowledge. This happened, and this is what he said, and this is for your knowledge as well. Now it's a little bit more different. Like I said, post 2018, I see, well, firstly, the opposition has a voice. Today's opposition has a voice, which I don't think was the case 20, 30 years ago. I also see that there are opinions, there are comments made against the government of the day. Now, I know there are certain things we shouldn't touch on, the 3 Rs and all, and I guess people are doing that. And I don't see crackdowns like what used to happen. Ops Lalang, we saw the Star, Sinchu, Jitpo, Watan, all either their license revoked, I can't remember what exactly, but some unfavorable things that happened to them. With 1MDB, the Edge license was suspended, Sarawak Report was blocked. I don't see much of that happening right now. Maybe, I don't know if the exposés are as intense, if the demonstrations are also as strong as what was, but I don't see it. But I want to know what your view is on what I just said, that now, post-2018, I find news media to be a little bit more free, a little bit more liberal in doing the work that they want to do.
I think generally I would agree with you. 2018 was a watershed, and I'll tell you a little story about where I was. But before I get there, I do want to say that actually the period before 2018 was much more contested than I think your general impression of it. Yes, of course there was control. Yes, of course there was censorship. Editors might get a call from Putrajaya. Yep. All that was happening. But I think that there was, in fact, some pressure on the media, even the ones that were aligned to government, to deal with issues. So I tell you where the pressure came from. And it's not just from the public wanting, more information or whatever, but the fact that there was foreign press. There was a foreign press that would report on Malaysia. And if you remember, in the 80s, there were things like the Far Eastern Economic Review and Asia Week. These reported regularly on Malaysian affairs.
And will our local news media pick that up? And
didn't have to pick it up.
Because it's already there.
Because people could read it. Yeah, and then they would measure so then the comparison was, well, Far East Economic Review covered in this way. Why didn't X, Y, and Z, Star, New Straits Times and all that cover it as critically?
Okay.
So it wasn't that there wasn't a counterpoint. And of course, in terms of information and frameworks, it's not just the media that produces them, right? Academics produce them. The fact that Aliran, if people remember, really comes out of an academic setting. They was run essentially by academics from University of Science Malaysia, USM in Penang. And so it was much more contested. But I'll grant you that up to 2018, there was much more pressure on the media to conform to what Putrajaya wanted. But, and so what happened, is it just that this new government, Pakatan, and the subsequent governments kind of believed in freedom of the press? Or was it that suddenly you had a situation where after 60 years of a single coalition dominating the country, you had rapid changes in political leadership? So the civil service are now saying to themselves, these guys might not last. Right? And so the civil societies now lean on other things, right? Their sense of professionalism or whatever it is. The gatekeepers now are thinking, well, perhaps I don't have to follow the orders or even anticipate the interests of Putrajaya because because Putrajaya, one day it's Mahathir, then it was Muhyiddin, then it was, so that rapid movement changed the way in which the state viewed the political actors that came to occupy it, right? Now, having said that, in 2018, I had worked for BFM Radio for the elections, and then after that, I'd left and I went to Astro Awani. At Astro Awani, I had a greater sense of the kinds of ways in which Putrajaya might exert pressure on a particular media organization. Pakatan's first round, it was largely, hands off. They didn't say very much.
Okay.
It changed under Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin. So with Muhyiddin Yassin, you'd have a prime minister as well, and also somebody, his press secretary, who I think a book should be written about her. But she was very controlling, and she knew how and what she wanted the role of the media to be. Right. And so we had COVID. We remember the 2 attempts at getting emergency passed. The first one failed.
And the second one was more.
Yeah. And it's through that I observed how Putrajaya was trying to shape the news agenda. Okay. It gave words to the media to use. Right. So it wasn't just an emergency, it was a health emergency. These are ways to soften the ground in terms of what they were pushing for, which is a suspension of parliament and such. So I think, and they had to get the royals on board as well on this, right? Yes. Which they failed in the first round. So I think that, for me at least, watching that, tightening of media control under Muhyiddin's administration, and then contrasting it with Ismail Sabri, who came in and his people weren't as competent, weren't as controlling. Really? And so you get the loosening up again. Okay. So these are things that maybe are not visible to the general public about how the media is controlled. Sometimes it's about personalities.
If you've stayed this far, thank you very, very much. We really hope that you've enjoyed this conversation. If you found that this content was helpful and could be helpful to someone else, please do consider sharing this. You don't know who will need to hear this information today. Until then, my name is Josh G. You're watching Unfiltered Business. I will see you in the next episode.